r/NoSleep. I found a key on my train ride home. I should never have tried to use it. It was late, and I was one of the last passengers left on the train. The cabin was silent except for the rhythmic clatter of wheels on the tracks. I leaned my head against the window, watching the darkened landscape streak by. That's when I noticed something small and metallic glinting under the seat across from me. It looked out of place. Curious, I leaned over and picked it up. It was an old key, heavy and ornate, like something out of a Victorian-era mystery. The strange thing was the tag attached to it. A small, brittle piece of yellowed paper dangled from the keyring with one word scrawled across it. Locker 137. I sat back, turning the key over in my hand. Locker 137? I knew this train route well. At the terminal station, there were rows of lockers people used to store luggage. I shouldn't have been so curious, but something about the key made me uneasy. It felt warm, almost pulsing faintly in my palm. I told myself it was my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the key was waiting for me. When the train reached the terminal, I was the last to step off. The station was practically deserted, empty platforms, flickering lights, and a stillness that hung in the air like a heavy fog. My footsteps echoed as I made my way toward the lockers. The rows stretched on forever, but I eventually found it, locker 137. I hesitated. Why was I even doing this? I had no idea what I would find. But the key felt heavy in my hand, like it wanted to be used. I inserted it into the lock. It turned with a loud, metallic click. The locker door creaked open, and I stared into the darkness inside. For a moment, I thought it was empty, but then something shifted. A box. It was a small wooden box, old and worn, covered in strange symbols that looked almost like runes. It smelled faintly of mildew and earth, as if it had been buried for years. I reached for it, a chill running up my arm as I touched it. I lifted the lid. Inside was a folded note, and beneath it, something wrapped in old cloth. My hands shook as I unfolded the note. "You shouldn't have opened this." The handwriting was messy, frantic, like whoever wrote it was in a hurry. My heart pounded as I unwrapped the cloth beneath the note. It was a mirror. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, small, cracked, and tarnished with age. But when I held it up, my reflection was wrong. It smiled at me. I dropped the mirror, my breath catching in my throat. The reflection had moved after I did. I stared at it on the ground, and the surface began to ripple like water. Then I heard it. A faint whisper, coming from the mirror, "Let me out." I stepped back. The whisper grew louder. "Let me out. Let me out." The sound filled the entire station, echoing off the walls, an endless chorus of voices pleading to be released. I stumbled back, my eyes locked on the mirror as the reflection began to change. My face was replaced by something else, something with hollow eyes and a mouth that stretched too wide, grinning at me. I slammed the locker shut, my pulse racing. The whisper stopped abruptly, leaving only silence. I looked down at the key still clutched in my hand. It was hot now, burning against my skin. I dropped it and ran. I don't remember getting home. It was a blur of dark streets and paranoia, constantly looking over my shoulder. I locked my doors, checked the windows, and collapsed into bed, convinced it was over. It wasn't. When I woke up the next morning, the key was on my nightstand. And the mirror was propped up against the wall, grinning back at me. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't put the mirror there. It wasn't mine. The broken, tarnished frame seemed to almost glow in the dim light of my room, and the reflection was wrong. It was me, but not. The smile was too wide, stretching far beyond what was humanly possible, and the eyes were dark, like voids of emptiness. They weren't mine. I took a cautious step back, my legs shaking as I tried to comprehend what I was seeing. The reflection tilted its head, as if it were studying me with a predatory curiosity. I looked away, forcing myself to focus, but when I dared glance back, the grin was wider, almost mocking me. I felt a chill creep up my spine. What is happening? I thought, my breath growing shallow. The whispers I heard in the station last night came rushing back into my mind, but now they weren't distant. They were in my room. Inside my head. Let me out. Let me out. I backed away from the mirror, my hands trembling. The room felt smaller, suffocating. There was no logical explanation for what was happening. I had simply found an old key and opened a locker on a train. How had it led to this? How was the mirror here? Why was it staring at me? I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, intent on calling someone, anyone, to make sense of this. But the screen was black. Dead. I tried again, pressing the power button with urgency, but nothing happened. The phone wasn't turning on. I cursed under my breath and tossed it aside, too distracted by the increasingly suffocating presence in the room. The reflection in the mirror wasn't just grinning anymore. It was speaking. "Why are you running?" The voice was a distorted version of my own, echoing and hollow, like it was coming from deep beneath the surface. "You know this was meant to happen." I froze. This was meant to happen? What was it talking about? I didn't have the courage to approach the mirror, but something was pulling me toward it, like an invisible thread tethering me to that terrible reflection. I tried to look away, but my eyes betrayed me, unable to pull from the image. It wasn't me in the mirror anymore, it was it. A twisted version of myself, its eyes darker and more hollow, the smile never leaving. I needed to leave. Get out. This wasn't my house anymore. I turned toward the door, desperate to escape, but the air grew heavy, thick with the scent of decay and something darker. The door wouldn't budge. I pulled on the handle, frantic, but it felt like the door was stuck. No, it was something else. Something was holding it closed. I stumbled backward, my mind racing for any logical explanation, but there was none. The walls seemed to close in around me, the shadows stretching unnaturally. A cold draft swept through the room, and I turned back to the mirror in sheer panic. The figure in the reflection was now laughing. "Hello," rumbling laugh that vibrated in my chest. It was becoming louder, filling the room with the sound of madness. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I couldn't even move. I felt trapped, as though my feet had been cemented to the floor, my body frozen in place by some unseen force. Then the reflection spoke again, its voice much louder this time, almost like a command. "You opened it. Now you belong to me." The laughter grew, drowning out all other thoughts. The mirror began to shimmer, the surface rippling like water. And suddenly, I felt a sharp, cold pain in my chest, a pressure, as though something was reaching through the mirror, tugging at my very soul. I gasped for breath, clawing at my chest, but it felt like my ribs were being pulled apart. "I've waited so long for this," it whispered. "You shouldn't have opened the locker. You shouldn't have touched what wasn't yours." A violent force ripped through me, and I collapsed onto the floor, gasping. The reflection in the mirror moved, stretching and distorting, as if it were no longer bound by the glass. A hand, no, a shadow, reached out from the mirror, curling around the edges like an invisible force trying to pull me in. My own reflection raised its hand, beckoning me toward it, its grin wide and grotesque. With all my remaining strength, I forced myself to stand, but the room seemed to tilt, spinning like I was on the verge of falling into an abyss. Desperate, I reached for the mirror. The moment my fingers touched the cold glass, a burst of light flashed before my eyes, and I was thrown backward, my body slamming into the floor with a sickening thud. When I opened my eyes, the room was still. The mirror was normal again, its reflection nothing but an empty room, reflecting the faint light from outside. I lay there, breathless, staring up at the ceiling, my mind racing with the realization of what had just happened. It had to be over, right? But then I noticed something. The reflection in the mirror wasn't quite right. My own face, my own eyes, stared back at me. But there was something wrong with them. A flicker, a darkness that wasn't there before. I didn't blink. I couldn't blink. The smile in the reflection grew. My reflection raised its hand slowly, mirroring mine. And as I lay there, frozen in horror, I realized that it wasn't over. The mirror, the key, the locker, they were all part of a game. A game I couldn't escape from. I had opened the door to something much darker, and now I was part of it. The mirror's voice whispered again, as it had before, but this time, it was not coming from the reflection. It was inside my head. "You belong to me now." And the last thing I saw before the darkness took over was my own reflection grinning, wide and hollow, as it stepped out of the mirror.